Hello, welcome to Cocoknits. I wanted to show you today a little trick for getting your gauge figured out on a really open fabric like this. This is Emma version B from the Cocoknit Sweater Workshop, and you can see how open that gauge is, and it's not super easy to knit with, and you get this really open mesh fabric, and it's really hard to figure out what your gauge is. So I'm going to show you how I like to measure gauge on this. So this is a little swatch done in Habu Textiles N100. It's the wide cotton Gima tape. You can see it's a tapey yarn, and I can get you all kinds of gauges. If you pull it this way, you could get an entirely different gauge than if you pull it this way. So where do you measure? How do you measure this? First thing I would say is make sure to wash or block your swatch in the same way that you plan to block and then wash the sweater. And the second thing is I don't pin this out when it's wet. I just I kind of pull it a bit on the diagonal, flop it around, let it kind of be what it wants to be, and then just straighten it. And then just let it dry. And that's going to hopefully give me an idea of what the sweater is going to be like. And that's all I care about. I am not trying to force myself to get the called for gauge. I'm checking out what gauge I like. And the easiest way to measure gauge on something like this is not to try and count your stitches. Instead, what I did was 3 stitches of garter on each edge. In the center, I've got 12 stitches because the called for gauge on the sweater I'm knitting was 12 stitches in 4 inches. I don't think I'm going to get that because I ended up going down a needle size. But it allows me to line up with the edge of the garter to the edge of the garter on this side, and it looks like I'm getting just about 3 1/4 inches. Yeah, up to sort of 3.5, just shy of 3.5 inches in those 12 stitches. So that's what I'll use for gauge, and then keep an eye on it as I knit. I cast on, there are 12 stitches in there, so take the bigger number, divide by what I got, 3.25 we'll say. It's 3.69, so I might go with 3.7 stitches to the inch. And I also got, in these areas here, I got 3.5. 12 divided by 3.5 is 3.4. So yeah, I got between 3.7 and 3.4, so I might just call it 3.5 because that's right in between the two. And then just keep an eye on it. So that is stitch gauge, that's fine. But then you want to be careful as you are knitting. You don't want to start measuring your row gauge or measuring your knitted distance if you've got it pulled way out here like this. Because that, if I were knitting, it said to knit so many inches. If I measure that, I'm at about 2.5, or I could go like this and get 4.5. So how do you know what to do? What you do is get it pulled out in the section that you're knitting, get it pulled to your stitch gauge. There I am back at around between 3.25, 3.5. So now I know I have it at my correct stitch gauge. Now measure your row gauge, or measure if you're knitting something to measurement. Now there I am at 3.5 inches. So that's how you get a measurement on it. If I needed to measure row gauge, just get it lined up with what you see as a stitch, and then just use something pointy to go into each. Just make sure it's lined right up not, you know, this way or this way, and then just poke into each hole that you see in a consistent line going down. So 1, 2, 3, 14, 15. Looks like I'm getting about 16 rows in 3 inches. So hopefully that'll help you kind of keep track of your gauge in something like this. But it's always good to keep measuring it as you go along, as you're knitting, because all kinds of things can happen. But that's a rough guide of how to do it.